All right. So I'm going to introduce Sam first. So Samantha Simpson here is an art historian and curator based out of Lexington, Kentucky. She received her BA in art history from William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey. And in 2014, she entered the graduate art history and visual studies program at the University of Kentucky, where her passion lay in art of the late medieval and Renaissance periods. In 2016, she took the position as Director of Art Galleries and Curator of Collections at the galleries at Georgetown College in Georgetown, Kentucky. In this role, Samantha has had the opportunity to work with numerous emerging and mid-career artists, both nationally and internationally. She has also worked on various independent curatorial projects, including Aurora, a group exhibition at the Lexington Art League in Lexington, Kentucky in January of 2019, and then of course Virtual Paradise, which opened here at Houseguest Gallery in January of this year. So I will hand the floor over to Sam.
Thanks, Megan. First off, I just want to thank Megan at Houseguest for giving us the opportunity to kind of bring this exhibition together. It was a lot of fun bringing this vision to life. Watching it unfold every day that I was there was really an awesome experience. And of course, a big thank you to Jen and Gracelee for having complete trust in me with their babies. Not only did I drive them all the way back from upstate New York, but they have complete confidence in me to kind of curate a show that I think is going to be, it is a really great one. Also, two things. I want to apologize in advance if my cats make an appearance at some point tonight. They're really curious about what I'm doing, and apparently they think that they have a right to be part of this conversation, so I'll try to field them as best as I can, but sometimes they're a little uncontrollable. And hopefully, I just got a notification that my internet is unstable, so hopefully I stick in long enough to get through my introduction before it starts to peter out on me. Okay, so this exhibition that the three of us have worked on, Virtual Paradise, has been in the works for, I think, almost nearly 2 years at this point since we started discussing. I met Jen via Instagram, and we kind of just made that connection there and kind of started chatting about the possibility of working together on originally what was going to be a solo exhibition of her work here in Kentucky. She was interested in kind of breaking into the Midwest gallery scene a little bit after being very successful up in the New York scene. Eventually, the show evolved into becoming a two-person exhibition, Enter Gracelee, which has been a really great experience. They're both fantastic artists that I admire, so it was really exciting working with both of them and, kind of discussing the future of what we were thinking of with this, what this exhibition should be. They were interested, had been interested in kind of seeing how their work conversed with one another. I'm not sure, is this I believe that this is the first time that you all have shown together. Second time, okay. They were really interested.
First two-person show.
First two-person exhibition, but they've been in shows together. But this is the first time they've been in a show, just the two of them. But anyways, they were kind of interested in seeing how their work, just the two of them, would work together visually and conceptually. Their work often differs in size and scale and often materially, but I think conceptually, their work is very comparable, and I think as we continue to talk tonight, you'll probably see that more and more. So, as we met and discussed, and on my end, probably a lot of sleepless nights of thinking about this show, the concept of duality is one that I kind of continuously gravitated towards. It's something that just stuck out the more that we discussed their work and our goals for the exhibition. It's something that seemed to be just kind of intriguing to me. And I couldn't get it out of my mind. So that's kind of where the theme of this exhibition has progressed. Um, you know, the idea that as humans, we innately have dual natures, I think is intriguing. It's a very human aspect, something that I think all of us can relate to. Um, and then I think that the work of Jen and Gracelee, they truly encompass this kind of aspect of our own humanity. And of course, I'll let them speak more specifically about this element within their work here in a little bit. So I don't want to say too much about their work independently. But the idea, the dual natures of femininity and power became sort of the main focus of Virtual Paradise. You know, there are two characteristics that traditionally are not one and the same. You know, both artists, Jen and Gracelee, create tension in their work in order to kind of disrupt conventional gender norms. And as we continue tonight, you'll kind of see that a little bit more clearly, I think. You know, their work comes together to demonstrate this sort of amalgamation of varying elements that ultimately kind of shape us into the people that we are, and to point out things are not always so straightforward as they may seem sometimes. You know, the work is both soft and hard, delicate and powerful, reflecting both on physicality and digitality. So hopefully the exhibition as a whole kind of encourages viewers to reflect on their own personal dichotomy a little bit. And of course, a sort of wider theme of the exhibition was the intent to kind of create this rather otherworldly space and to consider this idea of escapism, which is something that we talked about a lot in our conversations leading up to this exhibition. And something that we feel like we need sometimes, all of us, you know, particularly after maybe a very turbulent past year. So we were kind of attempting to create this bright and sunny experience to act as sort of an oasis for viewers when they enter the gallery space. So that's really where we were trying to go with the exhibition, and hopefully you all enjoy it. And as Jen and Gracelee speak about their work, hopefully that'll kind of come together to be maybe a little clearer. So at this point, I'm going to stop rambling and I'll pass it along to Jen and Gracelee. And I believe Jen is going to speak first. So I'll let them speak about their own work and their views personally on the exhibition a little more in depth from here. So again, thank you all for helping make this exhibition come to fruition.
Great, thanks so much, Sam. So I can share my screen, is that correct?
It's telling me that you have the option to.
Okay, perfect.
Prompt me to like stop. Okay, sweet, we're good. Okay.
Okay, great. So hi, my name is Jen Dwyer. Thanks so much for having me. It's definitely been a long time coming that I've wanted to have a two-person show with Gracelee, as well as collaborate with Sam in doing an exhibition together. So I'm very grateful that houseguest was able to have us. I'd just like to kind of give a little bit of background as to how I got into clay. So I grew up in the Bay Area, California, and at an early age, I was really inspired by the funk arts ceramics. It's both, I was really intrigued by the accessible tactility of clay, as well as the conceptual nature that the artists were making in. They were drawing in both their personal lived experiences, as well as reflecting the political climate and using humor as a really helpful tool to talk about more sensitive topics. And then I first fell in love with clay in high school. It wasn't until the end of high school that I found out I had both a learning and reading disability. And ceramics was the first class I took that really, you know, came really innately to me. All of a sudden I was able to learn in a way that wasn't only linguistic. So learning, Glenn Adams, a craft theorist, he talks about the way that it's important to think about knowledge as not only learned through language. And I think ceramics is a really great example of that. So at a young age, I was able to kind of transform, you know, my greatest weakness into my greatest strength through the help of clay. And what I think about when I'm creating work in general and specific for this body of work for Virtual Paradise is a representation of women, both in the canon of art history and then contemporary advertising. And, you know, the ways that they're very much viewed for or displayed for the pleasure of viewing. So I think about scopophilia a lot in my practice. And then I use these ancient Venuses as kind of this active agency and reclamation of the female self-portrait. So the Venus of Willendorf is probably the most well-known, but they were thought to be sculpted by the artist. So that's because it was in Paleolithic times prior to mirrors. That's why their bodies are like so disproportionate, and that's why they don't have faces, because that's how women see themselves looking down. And for the specific body of work, I was thinking about this idea of rewriting fairy tales, kind of this blurred space between adulthood and childhood, and the ways that there's like very binary tropes of women in these, you know, fairy tales, specifically the ones of my childhood that I grew up with, like thinking of Disneyland. So I feel like that really is like a way that I was thinking about duality in my practice for this specific body of work. So, you know, I feel like in these like age-old fairy tales, like you can either be Cinderella or the wicked stepmother, or you can be Snow White or the evil queen. And I feel like the reality of everyone has a complicated narrative, and no one is this like binary one narrative kind of human. Everyone's complicated and has a messy story. So I was trying to like create tension and disrupt these like gender norms that I feel like are still pretty prevalent culturally. So here's like a Cinderella shoe kind of like poking a balloon and creating that point of tension, but then the hand is kind of just delicately holding it. I always forget I can't see the time on my, I'm just gonna look at my phone. And then here's another one kind of creating a similar tension with a balloon and then these fingers like poking into it and a hand holding it elegantly. So in this work, I was thinking about Sarah Ahmed, who's a feminist and queer theorist I really love. And she talks about this point in women's lives when they enter adulthood where they have to like give up their childhood objects, and how those objects create this sense of joy and affect, and you're forced to give up this like feeling of happiness in a way. And you know, thinking about these fairy tales and blurring space between adulthood and childhood, I feel like I was thinking about this kind of like mourning of giving up that sense of like joy and escapism and play that kind of we associate with childhood. And I really loved the way the exhibition came out. I was so pleased to see how everything was installed together. So I just wanted to give an example of that, thanks to Sam. So this is the second time now I've exhibited ceramics and painting, and it feels like a really exciting new direction to take, to create paintings that are essentially vignettes for my sculptures, and the way that I see them working together and kind of activating each other is the paintings are furthering the narrative of my existing sculptures. And this piece I created as a wall piece, but I feel like I love it even more on this pedestal with the lace or mesh that Sam put on it. There's so much, one thing I love about ceramics is you can get so much detail on specific pieces. So I would only imagine as a viewer, you can really see like the lace imprints in the shoe and hand. I think that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jen. And I think we're saving Q&A for everybody at the end, correct, Megan? Okay, So I will pass the torch on to Gracelee and speak a little bit about her work and again, her views on her work in the exhibition and the exhibition as a whole. Thanks, Gracelee.
All right, let me get this. Oh, can y'all hear me? Yes, good. Okay. So I'm going to start by setting the stage of how my work functions, and then I'll get into more specifics. But thank you so much for organizing this and inviting us to speak and talk about our work. You know, even though the circumstances are strange, I'm really happy that we finally made this show happen. Jen and I have been talking about it for years and years, ever since we first became Instagram friends 3 years ago, or more than that now, and then IRL friends. So it's really lovely, even from afar, to see our work together and to continue these conversations that we've been having for so many years. So I'm pleased that it's happening. And I'm also so glad that people have been able to see it in person, even if we haven't been able to. So that is a beautiful thing. I'm going to start by talking about some of the poetics behind my work. And because I often approach the systems and structures of my work in a lateral direction, a poetic approach allows me to kind of lay a foundation that would support the finished products in a different way. So instead of a linear view, it allows for more of a cross-pollination and elasticity of ideas. And let's start. These are not living bodies or fruits ripening to only bruise and rot. These are fictive appendages and globular organic structures. Fingernails are not growing, sap is not running. They're mirrors of my experience, abstractions of relationships mediated by digital space, of how I perceive the world quickening in its technological progressions and emotional effect. They're ruled by touch, my own, their boundaries to one another, propped and screwed and glued and sanded, print touching foam, copper touching resin, sandpaper touching surface, and I touch it all. But it is in my touching that erases the marks of creation, the lines of the CNC and the 3D prints, and in that it obscures their origin. They become placeless or really originless. And there are, of course, ironies of pressing the soft, oozing, messy nature of bodies and food through the harsh and unyielding geometries of digital space. Even if you cannot see the hundreds of thousands of triangles that make up an object, they're present, always slightly shifting the underpinnings of the form. Their varied densities interact and curl in and out of each other in seamless unions. And the translation to the geometric, of course, makes for a skew, a flattening or a smoothing, because digital life is always cleaner than our corporeal mess. And as we all know, in life, there is always much more lurking just beneath the surface. But just as nothing is exactly as it appears, it also appears that nothing is unsoiled. But regardless of what lies beneath, how can logical science, the invariable coordinates of the Cartesian grid, lend truth to raw emotion? Well, in this space, the boundaries are merged. A banana turns into a finger, a lemon is a shell for an embryonic two-handed arm, asparagus fingertips across a gallery. The biocyborgs emerge. They're fragmented, bulbous, but underneath, they're still regulated by these geometries and their inflexible rules. And in that, there is no pure sensation. These are shells to hold sensation, translated into object form, or perhaps more aptly, mirrors with a different kind of refraction. But a key question is, how can an object hold sensation? And I answer that through touch and translation. On the left, I'm holding myself, scanned and archived, made into a file. I can email myself. On the right, Rachel holds my copper fingers while Cameron takes a picture, flattening the dimensionality and responsiveness to screen space, while I did the same thing a few inches further back. But to the context of these objects. You feel this thing differently if you've eaten a banana, if you felt the clammy peel in your hand, much like human skin, equally delicate and prone to showing the marks of its age and movements in the world. If you've peeled back the leaves of a cabbage like the petals of a flower. If you've cupped your hand around the warmth of another person. These are all little mirrors. And the mirror reflects and refracts oneself, creating an image of who we think we are. These things are sexless as dead things, and yet filled with gender. There's a historical link to sexual desire and art making. There are historical tropes that are often followed. Like, look at the modernist guys, Picasso, Matisse, Manet, their abstract expressionist descendants like de Kooning and Pollock. It's obsessively present in their work, and the directionality of desire, and in this case, of those men, a clear male to female linearity. But in my work, I'm looking to sever those lines and tangle them, confuse or joke or twist these historicized binaries. But desire or sex is much too simple. Erotics feels more apt. The erotic has often been misnamed by men and used against women, says Audre Lorde in Uses of the Erotic. It's been made into the confused, the trivial, the psychotic, a plasticized sensation. The notion of the erotic implies the uncontrollable draw of our bodies to something larger. Eroticism is being in relation, calling the inner life into play. And a part of this interest, the use of the word erotic, stems from these historically masculine traditions that I'm working to squeeze out of existence, a desire to make a softer world. And in this process, I found myself thinking about the embryonic, translucent resin suspended in a gelatinous mass, prints slowly coming into the world layer by layer. The process of removal is delicate or tender. Once the surrounding material has been scraped away or removed, it's the first time that that encased object has ever existed on its own in our dimensional world. And at first, it's done with great care. But soon this newness wears off. I begin to touch these objects like a person that I know, a material intimacy that grows over time. I'm less afraid, more brusque. I think that I understand the boundaries. And in boundaries, there's a relationship to the shell or the egg, simultaneously a protective barrier and a vessel. But more than that, a mirror. And while this excavation is embryonic, the gestation is anything but organic. It's linear, Cartesian, layer by layer, built with toxic chemicals and UV light, thermoplastic and heat. But the important thing to remember is that it is still making solids from liquids. There's an unlikeliness to some of these things, not easily cast or hand-carved. They feel like tiny organs or jewels, but also ghosts, which makes sense, as I often think about 3D scans as ghosts. But these ghosts manage to become real. They're forced through several more translations, from a point cloud of information to triangles, a line code read by a 3D printer and extruded into the world in varying degrees of accuracy. And once they arrive, they're liberated from that digital sterility, and they're subject to the aggressions of touch and dust and holding, pretending, feeling, breaking, sticking, smoothing, longing, polishing, aching, caressing, breaking, building, cracking, aging, etc. All of these things that we ourselves cannot escape. And there's also some kind of excavationist and additive mothering in this messiness, as I'm forcing my own will along with gravity's relentlessness onto these digitally conceived forms, which are honestly quite materially unequipped to exist. They're ill-prepared, so I slather them with fiberglass and resin, putty and paste until they're cocooned and solid, or polish them until the marks of creation have been completely rubbed away. But above all others, the form that I continually capture is my own body. Again and again, scan and archive to try to know myself better, or maybe capture different facets. I tear myself apart and put her back together again. And here, there are 2 scans of the same arm from 5 years apart. But the question that I often ask myself is, are they the same? So I'm going to skip forward a little bit. I don't want to take up too much time. In the last few minutes I have, I'm just going to talk about some of the work that's in the show and the relationship between all of the kind of conceptual poetic framework that I just built for you and these pieces. So I'm going to start by talking about a few of the indoor fountains that I've made. One of my very favorite, actually probably my favorite indoor fountain that I've ever made is in this show. And it holds a really specific place in the way that I think about material and also the way that I think about this series of indoor fountains. So in this particular piece is the first time that I used a VR sculpting app, so a virtual reality sculpting app, in order to create all of these forms around this central torso. And I was thinking about goddess mythology as well as images of the nursing Madonna in the central 3D scan. And so that component is surrounded by these vessels and stylized food items. And water is running down through the central torso figure and into the small cup on the bottom that's continually overflowing. So often with these fountains, the water is not meant to be a grand gesture. Instead, it's a component that's activating the form. It's a component that's creating some kind of complication, but they're not meant to be, you know, a big explosive situation. So the companion to that previous fountain is Sensation Without Feeling, which was the first time that I was using these 3D printed resin components. So often a sculpture will begin with a gesture or a joke or a situation that I'm intending to address with the work. And so this piece is humorously approaching misplaced modern chivalry. It's just a wireframe view of the sketch phase in Rhino. This fountain, Ancient Hormonal Soup, is in the gallery right now, which is great. And it was in a booth at the Spring Break Art Fair last March. This is a really interesting example. I really think of these indoor fountains as a space for new investigations and experimentations in the work. In this piece, I use this large piece of acrylic, and the etched acrylic acts as a splash guard for water droplets and condensation to collect and kind of drip back down into the basin. So it makes this little microenvironment in the form. And it also has a misting pump, so fog is slowly rolling over the edge of the fountain. So I really think of it almost like a sci-fi fantasy object, both in color and material. And then the title, Ancient Hormonal Soup, is from a Tom Robbins novel, Still Life with Woodpecker. And so many of my titles, actually the majority of my titles, are lifted from essays or novels. And it's really important to me the complex poetry that the titles will then bring to the work, and kind of bringing the viewer into a specific world that's made using language. I'll skip over some of these. Some of my favorites, but not enough time. So there is a companion piece to some of these UV prints. You can see many of them here in my studio on the wall. And these UV prints are all screenshots of the Rhino workspace, so the digital program that I use to make the majority of my work. They're screenshots of that program, and they show a specific moment of action that's happening to the object. So in the case of this piece, this two-handed arm is actually now a big resin printed object that's a little bit larger than life size, and I divided it into little different colored sections, and so those little wiggly lines are showing the action of cutting this object. The same with this piece, which is actually right there, in that I was truncating this figure in a specific way, and I took a screenshot of that. So these forms exist in the physical world, and there are UV printed replicas of one moment of their digital existence that accompany them. So it's a way on my continual journey of trying to determine how to have my objects live in both physical and digital space. This is one way that I'm answering that question for myself and making these screen-like objects that are at a similar ratio to a computer screen or an iPad, and are giving some of that information to the viewer. Skip over some of these. So I've also been experimenting with this particular set of glitches that arise from processing 3D scans lately. So these unbidden kind of bulbous mushroom-like forms balloon out of the back of these 3D scans. And this ongoing series is called Existential Digital Dread, which is a partially tongue-in-cheek title, and it's responding to the relentless digital world that we live in, the ways that our attention and emotional space are commodified within the current corporate balance of the internet. So these 3D printed sculptures, they start with a 3D scan of my body, and then they're processed through several different computer-aided design programs until I initiate a glitch. So I initiate a kind of an unbidden action onto the form, but I never know exactly what that will be. So it's coming out of the back plane. I mean, and often I'm replacing the figure on top of the form because I want the figure to be legible, but there is a process where I'm shifting the kind of bounds of the program to make something unexpected. And so this algorithmically generated mushroom-like, cloud-like form will occur in the back of the object. Each piece is a little bit different and has a dividing line that operates almost like a horizon. And I think of that like a sunset or a sunrise array that connects it to landscape, even though the scale of these is quite small. They're all 3D printed in about 8 inches, their largest dimension. So because of the digital nature of these objects and this intentional physical to digital glitch system, it fits into the conceptual framework for them to be 3D printed, which is very rare in my work. As I was talking about earlier, it's much more common for me to cover and mummify an object, kind of hide its digital origin. But this is a pretty important shift for me in thinking about digital fabrication as an obvious and primary form in the work. So with that, I'm done. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gracelee. Megan, you want me to hand it back over to you now?
Yeah, gosh, thank you so much, Jen and Gracelee. Those both of your presentations were absolutely wonderful, and you know, for me, even I feel the benefit of getting to hear you speak about it. So thank you. I'm gonna start off the Q&A with my own question, but you know, as I was listening to both of you, you know, between Jen, like you mentioned, you know, this moment in time. When children whom are identified as female are sort of like encountering this point in adolescence where they're told to be, you know, to put their childhood toys away. There's sort of this moment of what I would describe as, you know, an experience of victimhood, you know, and losing the opportunity for, you know, a safe, imaginative space for them. And Gracelee, you know, you're making mentions of, there's a lot of references to, you know, holding data physically, right? So like manifesting that which isn't real in a very real way. And a lot of these, you know, there's like this, it feels like time kind of connects both of your work. And I was wondering if either of you, you know, think much about time, you know, in the experience of making your work.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting connector between my work and Jen's work. And the kind of scale and tone of that time is maybe different, but we're both thinking about how bodies shift over time and like bodily experience over time and information loss and gain, which is so much of what I'm dealing with. I mean, directly, like as you mentioned, with data and, you know, what is gained and lost in processing a scan. How does my body change when it's translated into a digital form? How much of that is actually me? How much of that has been shifted to a point where it is not actually me anymore? What does it mean for something to be a replica of me? What is real, really, is the like base question that we can't really answer. But the reality of experience and the reality of emotional space is what I think connects our work so well. And that we're both using different means to try to understand our own emotional spaces and that of those around us to some degree as well.
Yeah, I love that question. As far as time, what I've been thinking a lot lately is about time and taste and how arbitrary that is, because it changes so much over time. So, you know, for a female identifying person in our culture to be taken seriously, they have to self-present in a certain way. They have to give up, or they don't have to, but, you know, most likely if they want to be taken seriously, their childhood objects will not be taken seriously, will hinder that. And then I think about historically too, like I referenced Rococo art a lot. It's this very decorative, maximalist, like whimsical art form, but to our modern eye, it can be seen as really kitschy and gaudy. But you know, in the 18th century, it was considered like porcelain, and that style was considered white gold and was a status symbol of extreme wealth and was very in vogue. I think that's a really good example of like how taste becomes really arbitrary over time, but like in the time period when it's in vogue, how much power that has. And I think that's just really helpful to think about as far as like gender too, and, you know, question like why something has so much value. Like if you have a pink phone case when you're a kid, like why is that so unacceptable when you're an adult? Just like as a silly example. But yeah, I guess like time and taste and arbitrariness are things that I think about.
Great, thank you. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and open up the floor to whomever has questions. If you're not comfortable, you know, just turning your mic off and answering, you can also type it in the chat box, and I'll read it to the group. So, who wants to go first?
Can I ask a question to Gracelee?
Yeah.
So not to sound like a ceramicist who's using a like, you know, primitive medium, but what do you mean by glitch? Can you expand a little bit on that when you're saying, and then I added glitch to it?
Yeah, so the way that I'm using it in this process, well, here, let me grab one of the objects and I can show you. This is actually the very first one of this series. So I was processing, I mean, I'll just go through the process of how it happened, and then maybe that'll help. But I was processing this central 3D scan figure, which is a 3D scan of my body. And as I was making this form a solid, which basically 3D scanning is only giving you a surface information, so it doesn't make something into a solid block of a form. It's just telling you like what it sees on the surface, because it's using photographs in the way that I'm doing it with photogrammetry. And so when I said, okay, make this thing a solid, it ballooned into this wild back of the form. So this is a tabletop. It like took the edge of the tabletop and made it into this wild mushroom thing that I had no intention of making. This was going to be a completely different sculpture. It was going to be like big and complicated and not look like this. So in that moment, it made me realize that there were ways that I can use these programs to find unexpected endings. And actually that reminds me a little bit of when I did a lot of ceramics in college actually. And my favorite thing was like the unexpected ending of what the kiln would do and what glazes would do and the magic of that. And this is like a tiny, tiny, tiny way that I can replicate that unknown within these forms. So I am using the word glitch in the traditional definition in that it is an action that was unintended within a computing system. But I figured out ways to initiate that unintended action, and then I'm taking it back and using it as a form.
I kind of have like a follow-up comment / question coming off of the glitch sculptures. Something that I honestly hadn't noticed, I guess, but the opening night, I had a couple people ask me the question of, you know, how did these glitches come about, and if they were supposed to be something recognizable. And each one of them said, oh, it looks like this, or it looks like this, and kind of become like a Rorschach test in some way. Is that something that you thought about while doing it, or have thought about since you started making these? I just thought it was really interesting that people saw something, everybody saw something different, and it kind of was interesting to see, you know, like what they thought of. It was very an individual kind of connection that they were having. You know, I think somebody said something about a head of lettuce. Megan, I think you were there. What was the other one that they said it looked like? Oh, I'm blanking on it, but I hadn't noticed it until they said it. And I was like, you're absolutely right. So I think that was really interesting that people are seeing things differently.
I think somebody said a hairnet.
A hairnet, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was something that you were thinking about when you were creating them, or something that was like maybe retrospective, or something like, for me, it was a total surprise. I hadn't thought about them like that at all until people from the outside started looking at them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my intention with it is to be pretty hands-off in the process. You know, I get the form in a recognizable, up to a recognizable point, and then I want the initiation of this bulbous back form to be as organic within the inorganic structure of using these geometries and meshes as possible. So that's the kind of twist of the thing, that it's going off of really geometric mesh information to then create this kind of pillowy, mushroomy form. So I don't have an intention in what the final product will look like necessarily, only that it has gone through this series of steps to become something that is the polar opposite of what the original scan was, in kind of belying its underlying geometry and making something that it did not intend to. So I love that. I love that people are seeing all kinds of different things in it. The hairnet, that's really interesting. But each one of them does have a different form. So, you know, some of them are more cavernous. I'm looking back here on the wall because there are a whole bundle of them over here. But some of them are more cavernous. Some of them feel like clouds. Some of them feel like pleated tablecloths. I mean, each one has a different character. And I want that to be true, especially because each of the gestures that are happening in the form are so different.
I had a sort of a comment. Am I hearing Gracelee, the 3D machines in the background? Because I felt like there was like this whole, I had a performative experience tonight, hearing you like poetically speak about your work, and then hearing machines, and then seeing the works behind you. I appreciated that.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, I do have both my 3D printers running over there, so that and also the combination of the printers and my heater is, you know, a wild mechanical cacophony. But I really like that. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing tonight, you two. I really appreciate both of your work. I'm Lydia. I was sad to be a little late, but this isn't like a well-formed question or anything, but a comparison in my brain is like being made between the glitch and putting something into the kiln, like that moment of chance or that like intentional loss of control. And I'm just wondering, like, if both of you or one of you could speak to a little bit more to that like letting go point, or yeah, the loss of control of material and how that relates to like ownership too, conceptually, maybe. Yeah.
For me, I feel like that is something that I struggle a lot with ceramics. I feel like when it comes out how I want it, or that really nice surprise when it comes out even better, it's so worth it. But there is like so much anxiety leading up to a finished product or a finished sculpture in ceramics. So like a lot of prayers to kiln goddesses, a lot of like meditation. But it is a stressful medium. So I appreciate that question to kind of like underline like the high failure rate of ceramics, and especially when trying to meet deadlines, I'm always like, oh man, I should, you know, make 2 or give myself way extra time.
Yeah, I feel like I often will talk to Jen on the phone and she's like, I have things in the kiln, I'm worried about them, or, you know, kind of thinking about the way that these external forces act on the objects. And it's so interesting because in material approach, we are on, you know, we're 180, you know, I'm like fiberglass and resin, and Jen is porcelain and ceramic. So we're like really on different worlds in terms of the durability of material, but I think the way that we're approaching sensitivity and kind of reactiveness to material is actually really similar. I mean, the epoxy putty that I use in almost every single one of my objects, mine is just quick lift ones that are all printed, is astoundingly similar to working with clay. You have to mix it with your hands. It's like very touched in order to make the surface I want. It very much reminds me of hand molding. So I think that there are divergences, but also links in the material experiences that Jen and I are having in the work.
Well, I have another comment slash question, and I'll try not to take over too much. But Jen, something that I noticed about a lot of your work, specifically the balloons, getting the chance to work with them up close and personal, I couldn't help but notice that a visual similarity between like Baroque sculpture, specifically, you know, Bernini, even more specifically like Apollo and Daphne. If you're familiar with that sculpture, you can see the fingerprints on her flesh. And so again, that's more of a comment, but the more I think about it, the connection between that story, that work, and maybe, you know, what your work is doing, you know, if you're familiar with the story, it's kind of a misogynistic tale. You know, he chases her and tries to debauch her, and you know, she's left with little choice. However, but you're also seeing like a dual nature there. You're seeing a woman, a female, making a choice of her own, choosing to become a tree as opposed to, you know, giving in to his whims. Again, I don't know if this is really a question or not. It's just something that I noticed, and I didn't know if that was something, even if it's just visually, that maybe you were referencing a little bit at some point with some of your works.
I wasn't, but I actually was looking at that sculpture this week, and I was like, so I look at a lot of Rococo paintings, but I look at a lot of Rococo like functional sculptures, vases, urns, candelabras, chandeliers, and gilded mirror frames, but I don't look at a lot of, I guess, so is that Baroque or is that Rococo? I thought it was Rococo, but as you're talking about it, it sounds.
I think Bernini would be considered Baroque, but it was, you know, that was leading right up to Rococo, so I think there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I like started using Rococo kind of like in reaction to Baroque, because in my head when I think of Baroque, it's like so austere and like, you know, often commissioned by the church, and so I loved the very like secular whimsicalness of Rococo, but I do really love the like drama of Baroque. And so I was looking at that sculpture this week, and I was like, yeah, I should like, you know, affect and emotions are something that are really important to me in my practice, and wanting to like evoke a feeling through my work and have it be like a very like gut interaction with pieces. And so I was looking at that piece as a reference to be like, I would like to draw more inspiration from that. So that's interesting you mentioned that. But I was using the hands and kind of like the squishing of balloons just as a sense to create tension, and as like not a very poetic but just very literal sense that ceramics, it's something that you sculpt with your hands. Like it's a very tactile form. I feel like in this digital age, for me, it kind of like, and especially now in this past year, it creates a sense of hope that you know, like human touch and connection is still alive and still can happen. And I think that's how I initially like fell in love with clay, is seeing the reference of the hand both in the work I was creating, and then when I started doing it myself, it was just really addicting.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
I have a question for Jen. We'll have reciprocal questions. So something that I have long been really interested in, and I think is a really powerful component of your work, is the like fragmentation and recombination of bodies and images or objects, and the way that that functions in a really specific way, and the like visual language that you've developed over time in the choices that you make in that. So a really open-ended question, but I'd just like to hear you talk about that more.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I feel like one reason that art, and this may be a little bit of a tangent, but I'll circle back. But one reason I think art is really special is because it does serve as this umbrella to research and think about and create work in reaction to like an amalgamation of ideas. I feel like in college I was like, I want to study art history and environmental science and art, and then I realized like you could just be an artist and you can make work about all of those things. And so I think when it comes to like symbols and this visual language I've created and continue to create, I feel like for each body of work I'm kind of like trying to at least narrow down on a few ideas, and then have my umbrella visual language and kind of focus on that. So this body of work was more thinking about fairy tales and gender tropes and blurring space between adulthood and childhood. And then the show I just installed was thinking more about daily mundane rituals and how they can be celebrated, especially during the pandemic when things are just harder. And so I feel like I have this like kind of like larger visual language, and then I like to like pull things into specific works to reference these ideas I'm thinking about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask like kind of a wrapping up question, since our audience seems to be a little quiet this evening. What are you guys working on right now? What do you have any exhibitions coming up, or what does your summer, and what season is it even? It's winter right now. What does your spring and summer look like? What can we look forward to?
I'll start. I am finishing up my residency at Waze Projects in upstate New York. That finishes at the end of April. And I think one really special part of the pandemic is that you can really be at two places in one. So I simultaneously, this past week, started a residency at the Museum of Art and Design. And that will go through the end of August, and that's all online, which is nice. And then I'm curating my first show at Dinner Gallery in Chelsea, New York. And then I'll also be in that, so I'm making some work for that. And then, yeah, I think I'm gonna set up my own studio, going on record.
I can't wait to see your studio, Jen. I'm so excited.
Yay.
It's gonna be so great. Beautiful, beautiful ceramics paradise, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I maybe have some outdoor projects happening. Lots of delays, many delays in the world in general. So, TBD, being tight on all of that future information. I'm working on this series of pieces that have very specific pedestals, such as that object there. The other ones are a little bit far away, so I can't show you very well. Hold on, maybe I can roll you around this way a little bit. There is big twisty one there, another peach one. So they're pedestals that are meant to cue digital space. They're meant to kind of be the UV print to the object. as I was talking about earlier, and that the pedestal is really obviously digitally derived. So continuing to figure out ways to cue digital space while creating an object that doesn't have any necessarily obvious origins from that space. So I'm working on that, just continuing to make work. I mean, some shows coming up, a lot of online things, but looking forward to doing things IRL again.
Yeah, I just want to say one other thing. I'm really grateful to have this like little discussion and artist talk, because it is really sad to not be able to be physically in places and like celebrate the show. So thanks everyone for making this happen.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice to have some kind of like virtual event about the show.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm definitely very sorry that you all couldn't make it, and maybe before the show comes down, something will happen and you'll be able to travel and make it, but at least we could do this.
Definitely.
Yeah, more than happy that we could make this happen. Well, great. It seems like we've come to like a really good place to conclude. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up for the evening. Thank you so much, Sam, Gracelee, and Jen, for all of the hard work and finagling and waiting and everything that went into this exhibition. We've had a lot of people come through and really appreciate the this bright distraction from everything else that's going on. So yeah, it's your labor and your work is much appreciated. And thank you to our audience for coming tonight and joining us in this conversation. And I hope everybody has a wonderful and safe and warm evening.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks so much,
Thank you everybody for coming. And again, thank you for everyone who helped make this show become a reality after, everything. So thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you. See you guys.
Good night.
All right, see you all.